The recording, okay.
Hi, Suri Weingart. I'm not a principal. I'm a mower in TMM, and I came out to hear the principal speak.
Elisheva Kamenetsky. I guess always like to define myself first and foremost as a mommy, then as a teacher, and then as a principal of Limudei Kodesh at SKA.
Sarah Monk, Shalom at High School. I'll follow Mrs. Kamenetsky's lead as a mother, 5 kids, and principal of Shalom at High School. And thank you for organizing. Thank you for having us.
So question number 1. Many times we feel the need to give our children everything they ask for to keep them satisfied. How do we build inner confidence and joy in our children in a neighborhood that can seem at times as having lots of external materialistic pressure?
So it's a really good question because I think that all of us probably have something that's our go-to that makes us happy, right? Whether it's ice cream or getting a manicure. And so we always find something external, but we need to also look inside. I'm sure there are things that make you happy that are not external. And one of the most important things that we can give our children is figuring out what makes them happy. And only they can figure that out. And the way they figure that out is through trial and tribulation. There are many times where, as a mommy, right, I have to say no to my children, maybe because it's not something we have in our home, maybe it's not something I want to buy them or for them to have, and they have to be upset for a little bit, but then we talk about what it is that would make them happy. Would it be spending some time together with their siblings, with their parents? Would it be going on a trip? Would it be going to the park? Whatever it is, it's extremely, extremely important, and I see it all the time throughout the day. You know, one boy gets a mitt, the other boy wants that same mitt, or an athlete has a pair of sneakers and they want that pair of sneakers, and this one has the pair of sneakers. And they think those sneakers make them run faster. It doesn't. What we learn, though, through conversations, even at a very, very young age, is that children need to feel. They need to feel that emotion of not having, because through life there are times we won't have, and they need to figure out how to make themselves happy. And through those conversations, you figure out who you are and get comfortable. So I can only say, you know, as a mommy of some older children and I've had many, many conversations with my children that they were not happy that they didn't get something. And we had to have conversations. And I needed to let them sit with the no. I needed to let them sit with the fact that they weren't going to get something, and to then come back to them and have a conversation with them about what it is they wanted, why they wanted it, and what else would make them happy. Because at the end of the day, we can't always have everything we want. What is it, do you think, that would make you happy that might be different than your friend? And those conversations started at a very, very young age. And I think we need to really imbue our children with understanding what makes them happy inside. Because if they don't understand what's happy inside, then they really will never, they'll be a child that is always trying to figure it out. They're always trying to keep up with somebody else. They're always trying to get to the next thing, instead of just taking the moment and saying, oh, okay, maybe I'll play that with him and then, or her, and then I'll share something that I have with them, and that'll make them happy, having that friendship.
To expand a little bit on that idea.
Could you in the back see the speaker?
So maybe if there's room over here, just so that they can maybe. Are you comfortable standing?
I'm comfortable standing.
So they can't see you in the back.
Hello. Okay. To expand on that idea, I think that 2 parts to this. When our kids want something, and they want something, and they fetch, and it's hard. It's hard on us because we want them to be happy. We want them also to stop fetching. And it's easy. It's an easy fix to just buy something. And especially if we're dealing with a lot at the time. If we're dealing with another kid that really has struggling with something that's not so easy to fix. And this kid says, but I want that latest toy. And you can order it on Amazon in 2 seconds and they'll be happy in 2 days when they get it. It's an easy fix. But we have to remember that we giving in to them all the time. We know what it's like when we're in a bad mood and we go shopping and buy a new outfit. We know how long that lasts for. Or we buy the pizza. We know that it really doesn't last for long. It doesn't fill us up for very long. And that's what's going to happen to our children. Now, there is a time and place to buy them stuff. And we have to react responsibly. But the most important thing is we have to make sure that when just buying them stuff, we're not teaching them to value themselves based on their materialistic items. That they don't think that they are now a cooler kid, a better friends because they have those sneakers or they have that jacket or that sweatshirt. Because there are times that we might extend ourselves financially to buy these things and we think like she's going to have friends now. But she's now going to school feeling like I'm a somebody because I have the sweatshirt. But we know that that's so false. We need to really teach them what gives you value, who you are inside. And that's something that's hard to teach. And it's something that the only way we really teach it is if we so believe it inside for ourselves. And the way we teach it is the messages we exude to them by our behavior. What gets us excited? What do we value? What do we say? Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Is it about our neighbor's new car? Is it about someone else's new possession? Or is it about things we see in people that we value and we treasure? What are they hearing us talk about? What are they hearing us excited about or stressed about? Those are what they're learning. And not what we say, oh, you know, you're a very special girl. They don't know that. They're going to hear what we value. If we value them for who they are, for their efforts, not for the fact that things that they got naturally from Hashem, which again is valuable. But there are things that we could say, we could teach them, you have beautiful hair, you are artistic, that's a bracha from Hashem. You know that's wonderful and appreciated and use the bracha well. But I'm so proud of you that you went out of your comfort zone and you went over to another girl in your class who you saw by alone and you went to talk to her. I know that was hard for you. And they're going to see that that's what we value. I'll never forget, I don't know if I'm sure we've all heard Dr. Palkowitz speak. He's spoken about how he went as a boy, you could relate to this. He went to Camp Monk, which we know is a very sports-oriented camp, and he was not that sports figure. And he came home with the Midos Award. I remember him telling the story, and his parents started crying over the Midos Award. They were so touched. That taught him so much. And, he's still relaying this story over, and it really hit me. We cannot imagine how we send our kids messages over what we value. And there is a time and place for things that we buy our kids and they can enjoy it. But we just need to know, are we teaching them to base their value on those things? And it's all from how we act, nothing we say. It's all how we act.
Okay, what I do find I very often hear from students or their parents is like, the five towns is so materialistic. So it's a real problem in the five towns. It's not our problem, it's the five towns problem. So I think, I have out-of-town family as well, so I think I'm comfortable saying that peer pressure is not a five towns problem. I remember in a very small little apartment in Suruskin, two ladies were like going back and forth between their doormats. One made hers a little bit nicer, and then I noticed the next one went out and bought a new one. The next one put a little plant next to the doormat. The next pressure is part of is peer pressure, materialistic pressure. It's wherever you are. It exists in different forms, and of course, number one is that I think with all of these questions, the main answer is that we work on our midos. Everything really comes down to our midos. And none of these answers really, nothing here is, nothing that's being shared, I think, is a formula for 100% proven success ever. I feel like kids are like yeast, you do what you're supposed to do. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, So I think anything that's being shared here is like things that potentially, we'll do it because it makes sense, or we won't do it because it makes sense not to. But then we don't pat ourselves on the back for success, and we also don't get too disappointed when things don't work out, because they're Hashem's kids. They were just lended to us for a little while. We do the best we can. Opportunities to involve themselves in those that don't have as much as they may have. There's so many opportunities to be involved in community chesed and programs where they don't learn not to take for granted what they have. I remember growing up, I went to a camp for many summers in Russia, and it changed the way I viewed materialism. When I went by a few weeks ago on Central Avenue, and some lady called me into a store, and she says, "You need to get this skirt. Your daughter's exactly the age. How old is she?" I said, 15. 15, that's the age when you get this skirt. Like, says who? And my kids were laughing because I think that what I've seen from my experiences in that camp that I've been in, and from what we're trying to give over to our children, our children should have experiences where they see that the world, that there are different people that have different things, and we don't take for granted what we have. That's number one. Number two, we should try, I think, to give them what the kids around them have. None of us, I don't know you. Most of us are not comfortable saying, well, everyone here lives in a house, but I live in my apartment, and it's okay. Now, maybe in Borough Park, maybe in Yerushalayim, but let's be fair. They should have what most of the kids around them have. If we put them in a school and we put them in a system where most of the kids in their class have something, it's very hard for a kid. They definitely get resentful and negative when they don't. So again, that being said, we can figure out how to do that. If Lululemon is the thing, I can choose to get my daughter Lululemon ponies because those are cute and they're Lululemon, and she feels like she's got the Lululemon pony, and at the same time, I'm saying no to the bigger Lululemon purchase, or work towards it because they deserve something. Wait for the right opportunity that your child can deserve it. Hanukkah's coming, a birthday's coming. I love charts. When one of my kids wants something specific, and I don't like to just give it to them, I will find a reason to work towards it. There's always something the kids could work on. That's the good news. So I say, good, that's something the kids have. I'll think of what could this child use improvement in, and let's work towards that. I put this question out for my own children because I thought, why not hear from them? And they said, we like getting things because we deserve them. So that's a thought.
Okay, when I saw the lineup tonight, I knew it was supposed to be included with this wonderful panel, but just coming after 3 responses, I'll try to keep mine a little bit short. I don't know that I have so much to add, but one theme that I heard in the presentation so far, and I suspect we'll hear it over and over again in the time that we spend together tonight, is this idea of role modeling, this idea of being somebody who ourselves has a grip on our relationship to materialism. And as was mentioned, certainly the Hashkafas HaTorah is such that there's a place for materialism. Dr. Pelkovitz has already been invoked. I imagine he's going to be invoked a few times tonight as well. But I remember one of my very first presentations, I think it was over 2 decades ago, so imagine what it might look like today, was he introduced me and the audience to the concept of affluenza affecting our community, that affluence is a challenge. And like any midah or any phenomenon in the world, it's something which can be used for wonderful things, and it's also something which can be challenging. So first and foremost is to kind of define our own relationship as a role model to our children with materialism. And I guess the other thing which I would just add, and it was definitely referred to, but I would highlight because it's something which I'm noticing more and more, is something which is necessary in this generation, and that is to actually articulate your values and your relationship to, in this case, it would be materialism, or any kind of objects or affluence as it may be. And I'll just share something with you that Mrs. Rookie Billett, a mentor of mine, shared many years ago with me when we worked together. And she talked about the fact that very often with our children in particular, we rely on osmosis for transmitting our values. I mean, our kids know us best. They know everything about us. They know our strengths, our weaknesses. They know what we care about, and they know what we put emphasis on. And, generally we don't have to express to our children how much Shabbos means to us. The experience of Shabbos in our home and the effort that we put into preparing for Shabbos is what conveys that. There generally isn't a sheer, right, in our homes and around the tables about what Kavod Shabbos looks like. And that was just one example, but if you think about it, as opposed to a teacher in a classroom with our own children, generally our values are transmitted via osmosis. My own experiences, and I'm certainly curious if other panelists feel the same way, is that for whatever reason, and I definitely have some theories, but I don't know that tonight is the place to share them. Children need things spelled out. They need things articulated. So while we may assume that our children know what our values are, once we figure them out ourselves, and our relationship is to materialism, that experience of articulating, oh, coffee, really expensive. If I buy one coffee every day and I add that up, that could actually equal a brand new sweater from Lululemon, right? And I have to ask myself, where is my value? And if I buy cool coffee cups with straws and lids and I make it at home, this is how much it's going to cost. So I am from now on going to make a decision. It doesn't have to be absolute. You can obviously also articulate the need for a treat, the need for a quick fix, but I'm going to now continue to have my iced coffee from home because that's just not a value to me. I'd rather the sweater than the coffee here. And I think that sounded like a long monologue and totally unnatural. It could be much quicker. Like, is this really worth it? You know what, guys, from now on, let's just make the coffee at home, because if we saved all the money, we could get something that we really want and that we really do value. So that's one type of articulation that I think is helpful and necessary in this conversation. I might label that the sor meirah, meaning I'm not going to go in that direction. I'm going to turn myself into another direction in terms of how I spend my money that matches my values. But then there's the aseh tov. And I think this is important. Also, this was also referred to, but I'd like to emphasize articulating it. I remember growing up, I thought it was the corniest thing. But with relative regularity, my mother would be sitting at a Shabbos table or at a Hanukkah party, and she would make this announcement: I love my family. And it actually had a little like sing-song to it. I'm like, Mom, that's really weird, right? But you know what? I grew up knowing that it wasn't about the tablescape at the Hanukkah party that made her enjoy the party. And it wasn't the gifts that we got. But she just loved being with our family, ad hayom hazeh. And I think we need to articulate those values, the non-materialistic values. They may sound corny. Another Dr. Pelkovichism, you ever want to share something with your child and you're not sure of their reaction? Do it in the car. You don't have to look at each other. You don't have to see them rolling your eyes at you because you're that weirdo mom. They also can't escape if it's a difficult conversation. But I think it is important to share that. I love Shabbos. I love Pesach. I love my family. These are the values that I have, and this is what I hold dear. And yeah, maybe I'll put money into that Shabbos, that Hanukkah party, but it's because of that non-materialistic value that was mentioned that I hold so dear.
Yeah, there's nothing like going last. I'll share something that I heard recently. Actually, a shout out, Mrs. Vernon, to issue of South Shore. I remember when my oldest son just had his bar mitzvah, and I remember when he was at the end of 6th grade, they gathered all the parents together, and I think I drink the Kool-Aid. Whenever other educators talk, I listen to all of it. So maybe I'm a little naive, but I remember very distincly when they were talking about what's appropriate for a simcha. I remember they said, you know, if your son hears you talking about what the logo is going to be and what the colors are going to be and what, you know, the swag is going to be, they're going to start to think that really is their bar mitzvah, right? If there's so much stress around, you know, again, colors and whatnot, you know, that really is what they're going to think that their bar mitzvah is all about. So, you know, for me, that was, you know, I thought a lot about that as we were not only making our plans for, you know, a simcha, but also just in general that, and again, just reiterating what everyone here said before, the way that whatever we give off to our children, whether if it's in a mood or even if it's in words, they take a lot from that. Kids, they watch and they notice every single thing that you do. And even when you don't think that they are, they'll find like the best opportunity to throw it back at you when maybe you least expect. I'll just share one more thing. I think one of the ways for kids to feel confident about what they do have, I think that's, you know, it's a larger question about helping kids understand their strengths and not their deficits. They should understand their deficits, but that's not how they should be identified. I think when kids learn to understand what they're good at and what they do have and looking at a positive, and, you know, these are all the wonderful things we do have. I love my family. I love our Shabbos table. I love whatever it is. And they feel confident about what they have in their lives. Then sometimes the things that they don't have become really maybe not as important. And when we focus on strength as opposed to deficits, I think that mentality about kids in general extends really to the concept of materialism as well. Kids learn to think about, the glass half full instead of the glass half empty.
Thank you all so much. The next question. We are living in a generation in which mothers have been described as helicopter moms. Mainly, we try to solve any problems our children may have before they even realize the issue. Do you find this to be the case? And if so, how does this affect our kids developmentally? So we're going to start with Mrs. Monk.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I actually heard, instead of a helicopter mom, I think maybe the better phrase for that is a lawnmower mom, or like a bulldozer mom, right? Where it's really smoothed out even before anyone has a chance to get to the bumpy part. But when you really think about it, what that does is when there is a bumpy part, like the corner, or maybe the part that's least expected, that makes it really, really challenging for kids to be able to really get past that. So there's, if anyone's heard of Angela Duckworth, so I heard a really interesting TED Talk recently, actually saw it on a reel, but she talks about she actually studied, I'm not really sure how you quantify this, but I'll take her word for it. She studied adults and children at all different ages, adults at different ages and children at different ages, through very difficult periods of their life. Whatever the challenge may have been, maybe it was a difficult period in school, maybe it was, a stressful time at home for adults, whatever it might be. And what she found is that there was one common denominator behind those who were able to kind of succeed in those challenging scenarios. And it wasn't IQ, it wasn't EQ, it wasn't looks, it wasn't material wealth, it was none of that. The defining factor was grit. And what is grit? It's passion, it's perseverance, it's being able to look at a long-term goal and being able to keep that, in sight and not get necessarily caught up by the little things that might trip you up along the way. I think everything in life, for sure with kids, is that balance between the short term and the long term. And one of the most important things that we, myself, everyone, need to teach our own children is grit, is how to push through a difficult time, a challenging time. That doesn't mean that parents sometimes shouldn't step in. Obviously, age is a major factor there. But we have to look for every opportunity, for kids to be able to step up, even if it's small. I think one of my kids is just very used to a little bit dependent. And they asked me, did you have to call the school? Did you ask them this? I said, do me a favor, go to the office tomorrow and just ask them. Like a little bit of a blank stare. And he did it. I was really proud of him. And that's not even, I would say, a difficult moment. But I think it was a very powerful thing for me to hear that, again, it's all these little things are not necessarily going to get you through the difficulties. It's really when you practice, and difficulties for a 3-year-old are different than difficulties for a 13 and a 30-year-old. But when we allow our children to practice those difficulties, even if it's on something small, like I have too many tests and maybe I need to go speak to the principal, as opposed to a parent calling on their own behalf, I think those are small moments that are part of a really important big picture.
Okay, yeah, certainly agree with all of that. And Angela Duckworth's book Grit is really has a lot to speak about that. I'm also reminded of Carol Dweck's very well-known work, Mindset, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset. One of the similar studies done about success, and the conclusion being that the key to success is people who have a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. Growth mindset being somebody who can face an obstacle that's there and hasn't been snowplowed, bulldozed over in any way, and has to work hard with that grit to overcome that. And definitely agree with Mrs. Monk that we're not preparing our children for real life in any way, shape, or form if we don't allow them or help them flex those muscles in learning how to overcome obstacles. But her study, Carol Dweck's, actually goes, takes it a little bit further and says that people without a growth mindset actually are less likely to take risks. Well, that kind of makes sense. It's a logical corollary, because a risk, by definition, means some kind of challenge, right? I don't know for sure that I'll be successful. Maybe there's an obstacle in my way. And now let's start to think about the fact that somebody who hasn't flexed those muscles and has more of a fixed mindset won't take a risk on trying a new course that they may not know if they'll be successful at, applying for a job that they may not know that if they will get or not. And let's think about all the doors now that could be closed for the person who has never learned to flex those muscles of taking a risk. Another characteristic of a fixed mindset is somebody who has difficulty taking any constructive criticism. I think that's something that we see, where the minute you look at somebody the wrong way, or suggest that there's something that could be done a little bit better, used to be that if we sandwiched it with a compliment, and a compliment the other side, it's harder and harder to give that constructive criticism. But how do we grow? How do we develop? How do we learn how we can be better if we don't have those muscles of moving past recognizing that something may not be so perfect in what we have done? And of course, we're not malachim. From a Torah perspective, we don't need social scientists to teach us all of this. We know that the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us as human beings is that we're challenged and that we're going to have to work hard to move forward. That's why we're called a man, somebody who can develop, who can grow beyond who they are right now. And I'll just conclude the very, very beautiful idea that I once saw in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Perush al HaTorah. These stunning, stunning commentaries on the Torah. And on the pasuk in Sefer Devarim, ki Adam eitz hasadeh, he actually comments at such strange language because man is a tree. And he notes that it doesn't say man is like a tree. It's man is a tree. Well, that's odd. There were different days of creation. There was a day for creating trees and there was a day for creating man. What does it mean that man is a tree? And he suggests that man is similar to a tree, or that man is a tree, in the following two ways. That like a tree, we're going to have springs and summers where we're in full bloom, where everything is flowering in the most gorgeous of ways. And then there'll be winds that will come and will shake our branches and rattle us a little bit. There are going to be challenges along the way. Fall will come and we'll start to fall apart. Things will start to shed from us. Winter will come. We'll be frigid and bare, lonely and destitute in that way. And we are like a tree in our resilience, in our ability to navigate those challenges, to bounce back, to flower again in that spring. Because, if you understand botany or science, because of our roots, because of what we have, because of how we're anchored to something which is truthful, anchored to the Masorah, anchored to Torah. And frankly, children are anchored to their parents for all of that. And when we are able to give our children that confidence to be able to navigate, we're giving them an incredible gift for life. And that is actually what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking for us to do. Not to snowplow, not to bulldoze, but rather to really help them see the challenge ahead of them and help them see how they can navigate that challenge. Because that's one of the greatest gifts I think we can give our kids.
I'm like so engrossed when you talk that.
But you were hysterical, and I was like...
Okay. Okay. The other day I was in the park and I saw two young mothers with their two young children, and the kids were going down the slide, and both of them fell at the same time. One kid's mother didn't respond or react, and the kid kept playing. And the other mother, are you okay? Are you okay? Is everything okay? What happened to you? What's wrong? And the guy, and the kid, of course, starts bawling. And I didn't say anything. It's not my place. But it was so very clear. They ended up with the same kind of boo-boo, and the kid was absolutely fine. But like my husband tells me, when all of a sudden when I walk in, they need me. Everything's fine until I walked in. Because really, our children are dependent on us. But the goal is to foster their independence. And as mothers, and I guess as Jewish mothers, it's a very Jewish concept to hover over the kids. We struggle with that. We want to keep them close. We do want to keep them close. But I think that, not necessarily at its root, but at a piece of it is that we demand perfection. We want perfect. We're not comfortable when it's not perfect. So when my student came to me saying, Mora, my mother is going to call. she's very upset that I'm not the head of the choir. She for years she's waiting for me to be the head of the choir. I'm begging you not to make me the head of the choir. I don't really have a great voice. Please. And this happens all the time. that the parents have concepts of what we want for our children. And if we can just be comfortable knowing that Gullus is not perfect, we're not perfect, and our children are not perfect. And, you know, the term good enough parenting was labeled in the 1950s by Dr. Winnicott. Good enough parenting is not just good enough parenting, it's fabulous parenting. We don't want to have children whose egos are through the sky because we've been telling them that they are the best thing that ever happened. They have the best voice. They can get 100 on every test, and I will call that school and make sure that they know that you should be GL president. Why? Hannah Davin, her child should be just average. That's not, you know. I remember at our Shabbat Bracha, somebody got up on Friday night and he said, you were hearing all these beautiful things about yourself. I'm telling you, that's the worst way to go into marriage. Just listen to what they said about the other one. You know, that's not. So sometimes helicopter parenting is me wanting to make sure that even if I can't control in my own life what's perfect and what's not, maybe I can do it for my child. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. So similar to what Mrs. Kamenetsky was saying earlier about speaking out loud and letting them hear, I think even when it starts with their arts and crafts projects in the house. My kids know that if they mess up, I'm not giving them a new paper to do it again. This is the paper you had. What can you now do with that mess up to create something different, create something better? If we're making a project, it's not, it's so bad. And okay, here, sweetie, take a new one. I want it. No. This is what it is. Let's work with this. That not being perfect is perfectly perfect. There was a beautiful story by Sari Yocheved Rigler. She was walking in Sfaz and there was a glass blowing factory. And she was standing with a lot of the tourists and they were watching the beautiful work of the glass blower. And they're all watching this as he blows delicately into a glass to form something gorgeous. And as they're all holding their breath, he put a little bit too much pressure and it got messed up. Something didn't work out. And if you see him quickly, he starts to work with it and he starts to patch it up and he changes it a little bit and he does what he can with it. And at the end of this demonstration, he puts everything down for sale. And Sari Yocheved said she didn't want to spend a lot of money on something. So she said, I'll take that one. And he said, that's by far my most expensive piece. And she said, but why is that? That's the one you messed up on. And he said, yes, and that's the one I put more effort into. And I had to invest more time and more creativity into that one. So less helicopter parenting allows for more imperfections, which allows for a lower ego and a stronger sense of what's truly important in our lives.
Well, it's not easy going at the end. I agree with everything. I just wanted to add, at the end of the day, when our kid comes home upset at the teacher, her seat got changed. And we might have the teacher's phone number because we might be friends with her or once called her. Personally, I struggle with the idea I'm only as happy as my unhappiest child. And it's very hard. We hate it when our kids are unhappy. And we just want to fix it. We do. We have this urge. I can't even tell you. I've been living, Baruch Hashem, in this neighborhood for a long time, teaching for a long time in TAD. I can't even tell you the change that we're seeing in the girls. And it's scary. They don't have this resilience. They don't have the grit. They fall apart over something that I would love to see them say, no, it's okay. I'm going to take care of it. I want them to go to a teacher and talk to a teacher about a grade or the principal. I can't even tell you what nachas you're going to get when you see your daughter or son do that. When you see them say, Ma, it's okay. I handled it. You don't have to call. You don't even think about calling. I spoke to the teacher and we discussed how I'm going to study differently for the next test. It does so much. It makes a parent so proud. Another point, just from the teacher principal perspective, sometimes our kids get a consequence in school. I have a thing about I'm on top of latenesses. I can't stand when girls are late to class. It's disruptive. I want them to learn to be not late. I do mark off, and eventually girls do get detention. Not even a big deal, but there are consequences. Sometimes a girl doesn't do well in tests. We all know we hate it when the teacher does -5 because the girl was talking, but it wasn't me, it was the girl next to me. Sometimes it's okay. Let them sit with the consequence. It's not going to kill them, I promise you. It might feel bad. It might not feel good, and they might be upset, especially if your daughter or son, I keep focusing on girls, is more of a black and white thinker, and an injustice is an injustice, and some kids really have a hard time dealing with injustice, and you might be a parent that has a hard time dealing with injustice. It's going to be okay to let them sit with the consequence. They will learn from it. They might be uncomfortable, but they will learn from it. When I was thinking about this question, I really thought about it, and I was thinking, think in your life something that you struggled with. For some of us, it could have been at one point finances or getting along with somebody, shalom bayis. We all have struggles. We can't escape them. And think about, it was uncomfortable. It was really, really uncomfortable. It was unpleasant. We struggled. And we would love to save our kids from that struggle, right? Who doesn't want our kids to be smooth sailing? But then if you fast forward a little bit in your brain and you think about the growth and the appreciation that you got after the struggle, when you do run in and solve it, you're robbing your kids of that growth and that appreciation because they didn't have a chance to get there. We all have done it. They need to do it too. We don't want to rob them of that. That would be the terrible injustice. Let them sit with the uncomfortableness. And yes, it's hard as the mothers, it's hard to watch it. It really stinks. There's no other way to say it. It stinks. But my husband is so much better at me than remembering. We have to take a step back and look at the big picture. We're not raising kids, we're raising adults. We want them to be good, responsible adults. Have that big picture in mind. It helps you so much. Because right now, they're upset that their teacher switched their seat and it wasn't even them talking. It was the girl next to her asking them to borrow a pencil. And that's not fair. No, it's not fair. Now her seat is switched and she has the stinkiest seat in the entire classroom. Now you would love to go call the teacher, please switch her seat back. Let her sit with this. She will grow from this. I promise you, it will be okay. And yes, we have to sit and watch her be upset. And we have to say, oh, that doesn't feel good. And we have to do all the validating and all the active listening we know to do. But they will grow. And we know that the older they get, the more challenging these little things get. But they will all grow from it, just like we did.
Okay, so I'm just going to respectfully disagree with Mrs. Monk. I like going last. I get to follow all these brilliant women, just say ditto. That's all I get to do. So I started off the evening answering the first question a little bit heavy. And the reason I did that is because question number 1 and question number 2 actually made a connection for me. Giving in to our children and materialism, and I said, let them sit with their emotions, led me to number 2. There was a mother that called me shortly after COVID, frantic. I don't know what's happening. My son doesn't want to come to school. He doesn't want to come on Sunday even. I don't know what's happening. It's only 15 minutes of recess. And this teacher is so strict and she wants to do all this homework and he's so unhappy. And he only has gym once a week. And I don't know what's going on. And what do you want from our children? I said, okay, deep breath. I was talking to myself. And I said, okay, you've been with us since he's 4 years old. How many minutes of recess has he had all these years? She's like, I'm going to guess 15. Right. And how many days a week has he had gym? Once. So, and your English teacher doesn't teach on Sunday. So what's really happening here? And after we had a very long discussion, what happened was we wound up figuring out that grit was in fact the issue. This lack of academic stamina, this lack of getting into the routine, something is challenging, how to overcome it. And this mother wanted to fix it. Okay, so how do I fix it? I said, you don't. You let him fix it. He will fix it. I believe in your son. He will fix it. You just have to let him go through. Of course, we want him to love coming to school. Of course, we're going to sit and we're going to speak to him. He was a 5th grader. I said, he's going to come to my office. We're going to talk about it. Let him unload. And Baruch Hashem, the boys like to unload. And he unloaded. And we wound up discussing all the different things that were bothering him. And at the end of the day, he realized, I'm just really tired. I'm not used to coming to school for such a long day after COVID. I'm used to being on Zoom. This was something so simple. And now I don't know how to do this anymore. And we said, okay, so now we have to do an entire mental health program on grit. And that's what we did. Because children nowadays, if we solve their problems, and I'll go back to what I said originally, when the night started, if we don't let a child, like the other panelists said, sit with their emotions, be upset about something, come to terms with it, figure out what it is that's bothering them, talk to them, they can't figure out how to solve something on their own. And then we start talking about self-esteem issues. Then we start talking about the boy or the girl, respectfully, who doesn't want to go over to that girl group or that friend group. She feels awkward, she's shy, she's not getting an invitation over there. Or the boy who's not joining the game because so-and-so said that he couldn't play. Okay, that's very upsetting. So-and-so said you couldn't play. That's not nice. But instead of coming running over, let's try to figure out what's going on. Let's sit with it for a moment. Let's see, maybe there's another friend group to play with. Maybe there's another game. Maybe bring a ball to school. Maybe you're the one that starts the game. Problem solving is the most important thing we can teach our children. Because, like you just said before, Mrs. Gibber said before, we're not really raising children, we're raising adults. When we look at children, we look at them in 5th, 6th grade, we think of them in high school. I'm always thinking about children 3 to 5 years out. What is this child going to look like if they're rolling on the floor in 4th grade because they're not getting what they want? And the mom is coming in to help resolve the issue. That's not going to resolve the issue. Let's talk to the child. When you ask a child a question, it's amazing what you will hear if you just let them speak. And you will hear from your child what really the issue is. Sometimes mothers will call and they'll say, this is the issue, like the mother who called about recess and gym. But that wasn't the issue. Let your son think it through, talk it through with him. Let your child express themselves. Rabbi Yankee Horowitz, who I've heard from many, many times, once said, parents need to not react, not speak, and listen. And you will learn so much about your child because they will share everything. You just need to listen. And that's the truth. As a mom myself, sometimes I want to react, and I don't react in the moment, and I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress, I can assure you. And then my child will tell me, of course, at like 11:30 at night when I'm falling asleep, they had the entire evening to speak to me, but somehow when I'm nodding off is when they have to speak to me. Will speak to me and tell me what it is really that's bothering them. We need to let them sit with that emotion. We need to give them the tools. We do need to intervene sometimes. We need to give them the tools how to navigate a situation. Oh, he's not being nice to you? Okay, hear that, maybe let's call somebody else this week. Maybe he's having a bad day. Oh, maybe it's something you do need to intervene with. There are times you do need to intervene. But when it comes to all their different challenges, think for a moment, is this a challenge? Is this just a little challenge, or is this a big challenge? The social worker at our school today was giving a 1st grade lesson on mental health. And she had a picture of all different types of problems. Your juice spilled, you tripped, your ball deflated, different things. And then different solutions on the other side. And the children had to match them up. What would be a good solution? And this is 1st grade. These are 6-year-olds trying to figure out what would be a good solution. Do they know it instantly? Of course not. It's something that we need to teach them. But when we react a certain way to pressures, they see us having a challenge, just like in the other circumstance with materialistic things, when we react a certain way, so they learn from watching us. And believe me, they watch us. They watch us all the time. And if we become hysterical, and that's not nice, and why did that teacher do that? And, that's so ridiculous. She really doesn't get you, And then that child is like, oh, yeah, see? Okay, she doesn't get me. I'm feeling, no. We need to sit back. I remember once my daughter came home. She was in the 6th grade at the time. And there was a young girl just back from seminary. She was running like a book club. It wasn't really for a grade. And so, of course, the girls took advantage of it. And they were talking and chatty, and the girl called me. The young teacher called me, and she was telling me that my daughter was being very, very chatty, and she found it very disrespectful. So I waited, and I called my daughter over, and I said, what's going on in that class? Well, it's not really a class. And she's like 18, it's like, what's the big deal? Like, whatever, and whatever, it's not even a real class. And I said, it doesn't matter. Someone is there to teach you. Someone is there running a class. You need to be respectful. And she was all upset with me. Very, very upset with me, of course, because why am I taking her side? Why am I not seeing her side? But I let her sit with it, and I made her realize through talking with her and speaking with her about it, like, this is a human being standing there. How would you feel if you were there? Several years later, my daughter became a teacher. She came back to that story. And she said, I remember that story. And now I realize what you were trying to do. Didn't realize it then. But letting your children sit with it, talking them through, listening to them, will give you all the answers.
Thank you. Next question. It seems that more than ever, children and adolescents are being pushed into all types of therapies to succeed academically as well as emotionally. Are we overdoing it? Is the school system pushing too much? Should we let children mature on their own, or do we say the more intervention, the better? Mrs. Gibber.
Oh, yikes. Thought I was going way easy here. Okay. I have a lot of feelings about this. I need you all to understand your schools love your children. We give our heart and soul to them. We do. You can't even imagine. I have I made a WhatsApp for myself, some notes. It's all about students' names, what I need to do for them, what I need to email send out. I live and breathe them. My kids too. I love my kids too. But we give so much to them. You have to know your child. I always felt as a teacher, I felt there was nothing I could tell a parent that they didn't already know about their child. They might not be willing to face it, but they knew it. Now, when our children are precious, but they also have limited resources. Their time, their energy is limited. And you know which kids could be up working till 11 and which kids at 9 o'clock, their brain is done. There's nothing left working. Now, a successful child, you want to do extracurricular, amazing. A kid who's struggling in school is going to be a little trickier to navigate and balance all this. I just need you to hear. You hear something all night. Know that when we call you and we give you advice and we say, we really think your child needs to be tested. We would love to get an IEP. We're not doing it because you have a mouth. We're doing it out of love because we want to see your child succeed. I can't even say this enough. We want them to do well. We want them to feel good. It's not about 100. It's about seeing success, whatever level that child is on. So if a school is recommending something, you are the parent. It is your decision. But just understand, if you are constantly disagreeing with the school's sincere recommendations, maybe that's not the right school for you. Maybe there needs to be some more reevaluation going on. Now, a child who does need extra help, again, we all know a child has limited time, limited energy. So we can't say, well, fine, we're going to have you tutored in math on Monday, tutored in Chumash on Tuesday, and this one. Oh, and then we should also throw in a tennis lesson to balance it out. They can't. They physically can't do it. Your pocketbook can't handle it, and you also can't handle the chauffeuring. We need to allocate resources appropriately. But the hardest part on our end is when parents say, no, just because, no, I know what's best, and you do. I'm not taking that away from you. But then maybe there's a mismatch. If just come into a meeting, if a parent is called into a meeting, please come in knowing how much we love your child, knowing how much we want your child to succeed, and we are giving you our sincere recommendation of what we think is best for your child. Come in with that mindset, and yeah, we might disagree, and that's okay, and you are the parent, and it is your decision. This is your child that you are raising, but come in with that mindset that we really do care, okay? And work with us on that. I think that ultimately I'm sure we're going to hear amazing ideas, but that's like the most passionate thing I want to get over tonight. Like, trust us a little bit. We're on the same side. I promise you. Which way am I going?
Oh. So everybody in this room, including myself, struggles with anxiety, ADHD, OCD, you name it. Hashem created all of us with all of it. It's whether or not it impacts our day-to-day function that we might need to see a professional. So sometimes when we send a child, when we make the recommendation for a child to go for therapy, especially since COVID, I will definitely say in the many years that I'm in education, I definitely feel that it's more prevalent now than before. Some of the stresses of COVID, all of us went through, was certainly a traumatic event, not knowing what was happening, how long it was going to last, balancing work and children at home. I had a mother say to me, I don't know how you expect us to do all this. I mean, I'm trying to work and I have kids. I'm thinking I'm also running a school and have kids. And that works. I actually had COVID and the mother wanted to know why I wasn't subbing on Zoom. We all had our stresses and we all are coming out of this a little bit shaken. And our children are no exception. I thought about, as a parent, it's so difficult to think that something is wrong with my child. But I don't see it that way. I see it as no child, we're not given any manuals. There's no instruction book, not even like a bad one, like an IKEA instruction book. There's no instruction book to how to raise children. I remember one of my children, she was very little, her hair was curly, and it grew like an afro. And she wanted to wear these cute headbands, only her hair was really big. So I was okay with it. It's fine, you can wear it. And she would say, it's too big. And it became like a temper tantrum every single morning. Now, I grew up with all brothers, tomboy. I did not know from this girl situation thing. I don't know how you all do it, okay? I deal with boys. We punch each other, we finish, we move on. Girls perseverate. She doesn't like me, I don't want her to know she doesn't like me. Okay, whatever. Anyway, someone's always crying, right? Okay. But boys too, sometimes. But everything's fixed with a jelly bean, big boys. So. Girls. But here was my daughter rolling on the floor. I canceled her birthday party because she was just screaming from her hair. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I don't know what we're doing. Like, I honestly, just shave her head. Like, I really don't know what to do. And he turned to me, he's like, let's go talk to somebody. And I was like, what a novel idea. You have to talk to somebody? I'm not calling my mother. She raised boys and me. Forget it. So he goes, no, let's go talk to somebody. Let's go talk to a child psychologist. Let's go see. And we did. And we went. And it was amazing. And it was fantastic just to get suggestions, just to get ideas. Did it mean I was a failure as a parent? Did it mean that my child was somehow dysfunctional? Maybe. But really, in truth, I just needed to know how to navigate. I didn't know how to navigate this. It was so foreign to me. And each stage that our children grow, it's so difficult to navigate. And now more than ever, I was a child, I got on my bike, I went out, my mother said be home before dark. That was it, it's very simple. Now it's social things, it's emotional things, it's academic things, it's technology, it's like so many things. I'm not quite sure how we're all doing it. And sometimes we get a child or a parent who's really, really struggling. And like Mrs. Gibber said, we love your children. We really do. We think about your children sometimes even more than our own children. But the truth is that we need help too to help your child navigate. We need to work together as a team. And so it may be that we approach you and we say, listen, maybe, try speaking to somebody. Whether it's you speaking to them or your child speaking to them. Because some children have even asked, can you talk to my parents? I really want to speak to somebody. Because they want to have a safe space where their parents are not going to get upset with whatever it is they have to say. And that's a little bit of an older child. But some children just need to have a space to understand what it is that they're going through. We talked about letting them sit with their emotions, but what does that mean? And we as parents sometimes are uncomfortable with our children sitting with their emotions. So if we take them to somebody who's a professional, it's like, okay, now I have a partner in this. And the schools really, really benefit from having those conversations with outside therapists, with getting IEPs, getting neuropsychs, because it helps us guide your children. It gives your child the same message, that we're using the same language, we're helping them navigate through something. So yes, it is true. Yeshivas and schools and public schools it's across the world, are recommending therapies more and more because we are struggling more and more and we are trying to recover from something that was extremely difficult. And even if we smiled through it, which I don't know if you all did, but maybe, even if we smiled and even if we tried to make the best of it, which I'm sure all of us did, our children sensed our stress. They sensed our nerves. And internalized it, and it may not have come out till now, but it's coming out. And we're seeing children who just need that little help because the schools need that help. They need that help to navigate your child through the grit. They need to help navigate your child through the academics, through the once a week of gym. Whatever it is, we need that help. You need that help. We can work together in a partnership because we all are on your child's team. We love your children and we want them to be the best version of themselves.
So when I think of therapy, I think there's obviously many different kinds. I remember you spoke about COVID, so I try not to think about it because I remember it was my first year here and I had 5 young kids at home, plus I had COVID, plus I was running a school and I had a little one who didn't walk until he was 26 months. I think he was, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 months during the pandemic, and I became his physical therapist also. And that was, I think one of the most challenging points for us. But nobody would question, I had to, I didn't have a choice, right? I had to step up and I had to step into that role. Thank you. I think kids more than anything, especially when it comes to older kids and younger kids for sure, the thing that I think kids need most in their lives are really strong, healthy relationships. And I do believe that begins at home and that it definitely extends into school. And I think that whenever there are good, strong, healthy relationships, especially between a parent and a child, and I'm speaking to myself as well, I think that not always, but a lot of the time that could sometimes minimize the need for extra intervention. At the same time, I'm not trying to put the therapist here out of business, but at the same time, I think that, when I heard last week, we had a speaker actually come who said that he doesn't really believe in therapy so much. I happen to not agree. And the reason for that is because a lot of therapies, obviously physical therapy aside, and others obviously as well, are really just, it really gives a child that comfortable, healthy, and safe place to develop a relationship with somebody. And sometimes a kid needs that because sometimes there's a personality that might require that. Sometimes there's a sensitive issue that maybe a child doesn't want to speak about. But, all those things are really super important. I once had a conversation with a parent many years ago in which, the child was really struggling. And it was a parent who happened to have had a very high pressure job, was very rarely at home. And I know when they were at home, they were not really at home. At least, they were there physically, maybe not so there mentally. And their daughter was really going through a very, very challenging time. And I remember, I spoke to the mother and she said to me, I don't understand. I've done everything. I've paid for therapy from the age of 18 months. I got them this, I got them that, I got them this therapist, I got them the next therapist, I got them the next one, and I got them the next one. I don't understand. And I didn't say it at the time. And it's a moment I will never forget because what I was telling myself inside is that your child is missing vitamin T, which is time. And sometimes that time with your child, usually also at 11:30 at night when you're trying to do many other things because they only go upstairs at 11:15 at night. I think sometimes that, it's that relationship that again, sometimes happens hopefully with a parent and sometimes needs to happen elsewhere as well, that I think a child is really craving. I think the relationship piece, we have to take responsibility both as educators and as parents for the relationships we have with our own children and for sure and obviously with our students as well. And those healthy relationships, I think very often help kids get through something. And I'll just end with what everybody else here was saying. There's no better partnership. There's no better thing you can do for your child than to partner the partnership between a parent and a school. So I'll tell you a little secret. So I don't think I think in my entire, life as a mother, I've ever called my kid's school to complain. And it was only because he was 5 and he made a play date with a girl in his class when we lived in Canada. And he went home with the girl in his class, but I never called to let them know that he was going home with to a girl's house and a girl from his class. That was the only time. And obviously sometimes you have to that's the only time I ever called upset, I should say. Sometimes you call for hopefully other reasons. The best thing that you can do for your child is to partner together with everyone that's an important figure in their life, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a principal, whether it's a therapist, whatever it is, and to partner. And I think to have that positive relationship, and obviously that doesn't mean that there's no constructive feedback, because that's also super important. But that partnership, right? It takes a village. Somebody mentioned that before, and that village is super important. And I do believe that sometimes therapists play that role as well, and it's always for the purpose of really being able to help each and every kid.
Okay, I'll again try to keep it short, coming towards the end. Clearly the theme here is that of partnership. And just to put it very bluntly, I actually think it should make you think twice if it's hard for you to trust the recommendation of the school that your children are in. That doesn't mean you have to follow, but at least be open to hearing that it's coming. What by trust here means that it's coming from a place, has been mentioned, of care, concern, and maybe of knowledge. And in this way, I actually both agree, but ever so slightly, Bakavo, disagree with Mrs. Gibber. Parents do know their children best, for sure. And I can't tell you how much I have relied on parents' perspectives in giving color to what we're seeing or understanding in school about a child. In fact, it's the first place we turn to when we have a concern. Help us understand why so-and-so may be functioning in this particular way. But one thing that the schools do have, and I'm now saying this not as an educator, but as a parent, something that I've relied on for my own children at parent-teacher conferences, saying to a teacher, this is what I'm observing. Is this a norm? She seems very anxious about math. I'm just curious, are all the students stressed about the upcoming Regents, whatever it might be. So one perspective that the school has is that scale, and that kind of trying to help you understand if what is going on is in the range of normalcy, typical anxiety, or is it something that feels a little out of the pale and might be really getting in the way of normal functioning, which is really the definition of when we look to seek help from other people. And I guess the only other thing that I want to add, and this is really honestly only from a high school perspective, that's the area of education that I know, and it's definitely been terrific to be joined by people from elementary school here as well and hear their perspectives. Gone are the days where, and I think this is kind of the root of the question, where therapy is some sort of stigma. I remember feeling with one of my younger children that I was the only preschool parent whose kid was not getting OT, and I must be something very wrong with me that I didn't send him for an evaluation. Kamenetsky's also walk really late, and maybe I missed the boat in some way, shape, or form. That was very in vogue, and I think now therapy for our social emotional well-being is somewhat less stigmatized. But I don't want to just talk about, what's true in the community. I actually want to talk about the perspective of the individual adolescent who's struggling. I don't remember who it was, but somebody mentioned that sometimes students come and ask for referrals or help. They themselves recognize, could you help me get this? My mother doesn't exactly see why it's necessary. But more importantly, what we see, and this is true with academic evaluations and also with students who are struggling emotionally, more often than not, there is incredible relief after the evaluation is completed and find something. Wait, I'm smart? I always thought I was not my language, theirs, the dumbest in the class because I always got the lowest score. Wait, that makes so much sense. I hear it, I know it, and somehow when I go back to look at my notes, it doesn't say what I knew it said, and therefore it's hard for me to remember. I have an auditory processing disorder. That's awesome, because now I get me, I get myself. Everything that we were talking about at the beginning, I get my strengths, I get my challenges. And the same thing can be true emotionally. Wait, that feeling that paralyzes me inside when I'm standing outside the lunchroom and I can't walk in, that's anxiety. There's a name to that. And there are tools that you can give me to help me cope with that. That's a gift. That's something that we're giving our children. And very, very often we find that not only isn't there a stigma as much socially because it's the in thing to do, to be a good parent, to take care of these things, but for the child themselves, it's liberating. I understand who I am, I understand my strengths, and I understand my challenges. Relating to the previous question, in a world, in a society, a family, in a school where challenges are embraced and we are given the strength to try to meet those challenges, that can be an unbelievable thing.
Okay. I think almost everything's been said. So I'll just share maybe from the other side, because this all was that's why I'm not the principal here. The other side. I'm all for medication. I grew up with my mother telling me, like, you get that epidural. That's all I heard, literally. From the day we came out, we were told to get the epidural, little cutie. So medication is wonderful. We have therapists and doctors to deal with that. Sort of from the other side, before we have that conversation, what can we do? It's interesting you were talking about COVID and what that brought out. Now, I found my kids came home very frustrated that the teachers were standing there saying, we know how difficult this was for you. We know how anxious you were. And my kids were like, what is she talking about? It's the best time of my life. So, that being said, I think we need to be careful not to overuse terminology and use terms very loosely. Anxiety might just be nervous. We don't need to say to our kid, oh, you're anxious, you have anxiety. Maybe they're just nervous. They might not have insomnia. Maybe they were in front of a screen and they can't sleep. They may not have ADHD. Maybe they're a 4-year-old energized kid who had a lot of Powerade. They may not be, let's keep going. You can't keep going. They may not be OCD. They just might be very organized and meticulous. So I find that I see the children themselves using terms. They're not depressed. They're sad. They use these terms so loosely. Now, of course, back you shared about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he spoke so often about wherever we see a wave of something in a generation, understand that comes with a lot of beauty. There's something very big that's going on. So if there is a wave of therapy, it means our hearts and our minds are open. We are able to look deeper into hearts and minds. And I think it's coming along with girls taking such a deep interest in learning more and knowing more and getting to the depths of matters. It's very optimistic. But along with that, I think it's important, as parents and as teachers, not to put any label on them before we think a lot. We speak to doctors, we speak to therapists. We don't want to overgeneralize, and we also have to be very careful not to ever use it as an easy way out. I remember speaking to a friend of mine, and she was heading to a simcha, and I said, wow, how are you going already? It's like 6:30, the kids are crazy. She's like, that's what melatonin's for. I pop melatonin into everyone's mouth, they're fast asleep, and I head out to a simcha. Not judging her situation, but we need to be very mindful of what am I doing before the fact. But how do I make sure that, again, back to like perfect and imperfect, how do I make sure that I'm not just trying to fix and perfect something that doesn't need perfecting? And how do I make sure that my child is not picking up on language or labels prematurely?
Thank you. Next question. How should we deal with a child who prefers to be less observant than the level of Torah values that we try to implement in the family? For example, what if my daughter does not want to keep the level of tznius that I do? And what if my son is not interested in learning or going to minyan? Sorry, this is kind of
It's a heavy sword. We need a little lightness. I don't know. I'm going to get too intense. I think. I don't know. It's good we're sitting next to each other. Okay, so also kick me if I go too long because I'm pretty, and if I spill on you also. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Pretty passionate about this, so I'm sure all the panelists are. So, when I hear that question, I'm actually going to focus on the very specific examples, even though I know the intent was probably not to stick to those examples. The examples were those of tefillah and learning tefillah, I believe, and tznius. So, to me, and I think to all of us, we recognize that all three of those are actually ways that we as Jews relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm sure a topic for a different time and a different panel is understanding tznius not as a concept ben adam l'chavero, but rather as a concept ben adam l'makom. The pasuk in Micha says very clearly, Hatznei lechet im Hashem Elokecha, that it's about being tzanua with Hashem, that having a modest A sense of modesty is a person who can recognize that they are walking with Hashem, and that they are small compared to Hashem, and any greatness within them is only due to that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. How that connects to our understanding of tznius in a practical way and dress and everything, I think is actually a very interesting ways to connect those things, but like I said, not necessarily for tonight. Tefillah, learning, and tznius are all vehicles for connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think that when it comes to the chinuch of our children, and if we trace this all the way back to Har Sinai, there are really two modalities in which we are machanech our children. There is that which we tell them are the absolutes with great clarity, and there's that which we recognize as part of them developing their own relationship with Hashem. With my students, I often refer to it as discovering your first name versus your last name, meaning there's that which we receive as part of our Masorah from our parents, that would be represented by your last name, and that Masorah is the same Masorah that has come back all the way from Sinai. I once saw, actually in one of Darche's newsletters, Rabbi Bender quoting from Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, who said that the only concept in Yadus that does not have a clear Masorah is actually the concept of chinuch, that things evolve over generations, the concepts are the same, but how we're machanech needs to change over generations and time. And I grappled with that a little bit in my head, but I'll share a little bit of what I think that looks like and what I think that means. I think it means that for a person to really feel connected to the Ribono Shel Olam, that's not something that anybody can hand you on a silver platter. We can give you a lot of constants. We can give our children and our students values, ideals, knowledge to a great degree. But at the end of the day, the relationship that they develop with Hashem through tznius, through learning, through davening, needs to be your own. Your mother may have taught you, your Mora may have taught you what to daven. Nobody told you how to have kavanah. You may have read books that helped you, gave you tips, gave you guidelines, gave you that part of a Masorah, but your own emotions, your own way of connecting to the words of tefillah is something that's deeply personal and something which evolves through your own time and space that you take to connect ultimately to the Ribono Shel Olam. At the end of his Hakdama to Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramchal quotes a pasuk in Iyov, Hein yiras Hashem hi chachma. And the Gemara actually talks about the fact the word Hein means echad, chad, that the only chachma in the world is yiras Hashem. And the Rav Kook actually asked, that's weird, that's strange. What do you mean? There's so much chachma in the world. There's science, there's math, there's Torah, the Gemaras, there's Tosfos, there's so many things. What do you mean that the only chachma in the world is yiras Hashem? Rav Kook explained so beautifully that chachma, that there is knowledge in the world that can be transmitted. I can tell you a mathematical formula. I could tell you how to measure the perimeter of this room if you wanted to put in a new carpet. I could tell you how to look and understand the constellations. I could tell you how the heart works and how the brain works. But when it comes to yiras Hashem, I can't give that over to you. It's something that you need to develop for yourself. It's something that you need to own and make your own. And that may take a lot of time. So I believe very strongly that when it comes to these topics, we need to give that basic structure. We need to say, this is every day we make time to daven. This is what it means to be modest. But what that looks like for you as a person, I want you to have a part of the journey. I want you to ask yourself some of those questions, not when you're 6 or 7. I'm a high school person. But when you are 16 and 17, these are questions you should be asking yourself. What is my relationship with Hashem? What does my tefillah look like? And nobody can dictate or should be dictating that to me. So practically, what does that look like? I believe that as parents, we need to have clarity. Every child should have a sitter. Every morning should begin with some sort of davening. How long they daven, what they say, I believe is something which should be part of a person's own experience and relationship with Hashem. Again, not when they're 6 or 7, but when they're 12, 13, maybe in this generation even a little bit younger. That giving them that basic structure of our Masorah tells us that we daven, but what that looks like. And when we watch them struggle, to embrace that struggle as a piece of the journey, a piece of that process of them coming to develop their own relationship with Hashem. How you guide them, what you allow within your family, what is an absolute non-negotiable, those are conversations that should and could be had. But let's not forget that the goal is not that they daven the way that we daven, or that they just mimic and are robotic about their sense of tznius by copying what we do, but that they've given time and thought. And part of that thought probably includes some struggle, some questions of I'm not sure, I don't know how, and has been emphasized over and over again tonight by our panel, making space for those conversations, making it feel safe to ask those questions, acknowledging your own struggles. I tell my students and my own children, I'm not a natural davener. I'm not sure who is, but I know I'm not one. That I've had to work hard. I understand why Chazal call it an avodah shebalev. Hearing that that's a struggle is chizuk for the struggle that our children have, and allows them to find their own relationship, to develop their own relationship, which is so vitally important for each and every yid.
Thank you so much. So it's obviously a really heavy question. So I think for everybody here, you know, our children, your children are your greatest joy. They're your greatest treasure. It's the greatest gift that Hashem could have given you. And when you have a gift, you want to treat it well, you know, forever, not just for when you first get it and it's new. It's really, really important. And yet, at the same time, it's important to remember that we're dealing with humans, and you're dealing with kids. Yeah, I once saw an amazing quote that there's no such thing as dropouts, there's only pushouts. And I think a lot of the time when a kid struggles with Yiddishkeit, and I'm definitely not the expert on any of this, but when a kid struggles with Yiddishkeit, a lot of the time it's because they have felt pushed away, and they have felt judged, and they have felt like somebody is looking at them a little bit differently. I'm sure all of us here, maybe everyone sitting here has been on the receiving end of that, and myself as well, in both ways. I think that, you know, I'm sure everyone here has seen, you know, maybe a girl walking down the street, maybe dressed a little bit differently than you would have expected from a kid that goes to X school or is part of this family or whatever it is. I think one of the most important things that we could do for each other is to really stop judging everybody else's kids, because I think what we're doing in that scenario is we're feeding a really, really challenging problem. There's no kid in the world that sits around saying to themselves, I want to now go off the derech. I want to now push as many limits as I possibly can. Again, same as Mrs. Kamenetsky, I deal with high school kids. It's a really complicated time of your life. And I think, you know, if you think back to your own time, you know, your own upbringing, I was raised by Bali Tshuva, so my parents were pretty chilled because anything I did was more than they had. They always said when they were growing up. And I think we have to give kids the space to discover themselves, to create their identity, to figure out what's meaningful to them. I think in today's day and age, and for sure guilty of this as well, we hold kids sometimes to a standard that really isn't necessarily so fair. I think we expect them to be a finished product at the ripe old age of 14 or 15. Mm-hmm. And when you think about your own life, and I tell myself this all the time, you know, just like for everyone here, I'm sure, regardless of whatever your journey of life may have been, life is a journey, right? There's ups, there's downs, there's bumps, there's smooth points. We have to remember that that's the case for them as well. And for some reason, and again, totally guilty here, we sometimes forget that, right, that journey part, that they don't, just because they go to this school or they come from this family or this shul or this community, doesn't necessarily mean that everything is good. There's no problem. Kids have a lot, there's a lot of depth And there's a lot of challenges that kids today, as we all know, have to deal with that we never had to deal with, for sure, that I never had to deal with, as a young kid growing up. So I saw, I think when it comes down to everything, kind of like I said before, relationships are the key to so much. And a lot of the time when a kid is in pain, sometimes that comes from a relationship, whether it's a relationship with someone in their house, whether it's a relationship with a teacher. I have to make every Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and sometimes even more often, I have to think to myself, am I doing this right? And sometimes, you'll have a kid, we'll have a student who will really, really push your buttons, who will really, maybe push a limit that you can't even believe that they're doing it. And it's at that moment that we have to make a choice. And we either have to try and treat them kind of like a robot, this is what they're supposed to be doing and they're not, or we have to remember to really treat them like a human. And sometimes kids have real struggles. I remember I once had a student who, she really gave me a run for my money. Like, I've been doing this for 19 years, and it was one of the most challenging situations. She didn't follow any rules. She didn't want to do anything. And I really didn't know what to do. And, at a certain point, I said to myself, okay, it's not working. This is not working. This isn't a good place for them. They need to find a different place. Never mind that where else are they going to go? It's not working. They have to figure out something else. And I spoke to a Rav, and I called them, and they said, what do you mean? Whatever you're doing for them is not working, so figure something out that is. And it was a really powerful moment for me. And I remember I sat down with the parents, a few months later, and it took me a long time to come to peace with that. And for whatever reason, and I sat down with her parents for a long time, and I shared them exactly the process that I had been through over the course of the last number of months. This is what I was thinking. This is why I was really upset. This is what I did. This is how I dealt with that. And her mother started to cry. And she said to me, I just want you to know that I went through the same process about my own child, my own daughter, over the course of the summer as well. She also, looked at her daughter as frustrating and all the negative adjectives that you could possibly think of. And she took a minute and she said, I spent the entire summer just thinking about, I need to learn to love my child more. I need to learn to embrace her more. And, I have this email that she wrote me after that. And my husband said to me, he's like, you need to print that out. And every time that you're doubting or every time that you're frustrated, you need to remember to read it. And I do. And I keep it pretty close to me. Thank God I haven't to take it out all that often. And I think that's really important. I'll share one word of, practical, something that we could do when we're dealing with kids who are really challenging, maybe who are not engaged, maybe who are not inspired. In this past week's Parsha, so Hashem has this moment where he says, like, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do to Sodom? I'm about to destroy the entire city. I'm about to turn it totally upside down. Should I share it with him? So it's a funny question. I don't know. Share it. It's like you talking to yourself. Like, share it or don't share it, whatever. And then when Hashem kind of again is having this whole conversation with himself, and he says, and he ends up telling Abraham what the plan is, because Abraham obviously was the beginning of this, amazing, future for the Jewish people. And there's a very powerful message there, because right after Hashem has this conversation, again, kind of with himself, you see Abraham start negotiating, right? Maybe there are 50 tzaddikim in stone. Maybe there are 40. Maybe there are 30, right? And he starts negotiating. And I think the lesson here is sometimes we're made aware of people's struggles, right? Whether it's out in the open, sometimes we find out about it in a different way. Every single time that we're told about someone that is struggling, it's for the reason that you start to call out to Hashem and you object and you doubt it. And nobody chooses to go through a difficult time. Nobody chooses to be a teenager in pain. Nobody chooses to kind of push away what their entire family stands for. They don't choose that because they want it. They choose that because they're in pain. And even though sometimes there's nothing that we could do about it immediately, the very least we could do is, object to Hashem on their behalf and to daven that them and their families and whomever else is close to them find some peace in being able to handle whatever the situation is. That's that. Yeah. They need a little humor.
Yeah. It'd be funny. My 4-year-old came home from overday camp saying she wanted to wear a bikini because the girls were, and she was 4. And I said, okay, she's 4. This is one of those things. And my son, who was much older, was crying his head off, davening the entire night, saying to Hillel, Ma, what is going on? She's going off the terrace. And I said, sweetie, it's one of those things. At that age, it's just because that's what the girls are doing, and just give it a few days. Sure enough, she comes home 3 days later. She's like, Ma, I realize only poor kids wear them because they don't have enough money to buy the ones that are faux. And I said, Lady, it's like I told you so. But this question really is so, in terms of the ages and stages of children, when they're young and they show these sort of things, it generally is what's going on around them. But as they become teenagers, and the word bachar is bechira, they want to exercise their freedom of choice. They're talking back to your tree analogy, that the teenage years are the limbs going out on their own. They don't want to be exactly aligned. They want to flex. So one thing that we could be proactively doing is really to respect them, and give them the freedom. Okay, now I'm talking more within the parameters of halacha, but to give them the freedom to be and to respect them, and let them never ever assume that we want them to make choices because of our own self-image, we don't want them looking a certain way because of what, like you were talking about, what other people might say or might think. If something's within halacha and it's just not our thing, really to sometimes weigh and measure, is this worth the fight? Because what does it look like? I'm a teacher in a school, and I'm and I'm on this kind of block, and I'm this kind of. Or to talk to our daughter, it might be that she has such a creative soul. She's chalky to figure out a way to fun it up a little. And for her, it's just about that earring. And it's sometimes we look at things and we automatically assume, oh no, this is the beginning of something dangerous, because there's, unfortunately, we know that it's not pashet, but not always is it. But if we respect them and we open ourselves up to hearing and understanding. The other thing that I've seen, I guess, through the years is working with teenage girls, makes me think of when I was, as a kid, my sister and I shared a room, and my mother would lay down with each of us. And my mother would always lay with my older sister first, and she would always fall asleep in that bed. And I would get very angry. And I would say, Ma, get up, Ma, get up. It's my turn. I would get very, very, very upset. And I remember as a young girl yelling, you're the meanest mother. You're the worst mother. And then I would almost laugh to myself and say, well, then why do you want the meanest, worst lady sleeping in your bed? Because we hate so much because we love so much. And sometimes a child, a teenager that's struggling with hate towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as they might say, or anger against Torah, halacha, things they've learned, it's usually that they have a very sensitive soul. And it's because they love so much, that they so deeply desire a relationship with Hashem. They so deeply wish that the things that they don't love about themselves wouldn't be, the things they've done hurt them and pain them, that the pain of the distance and what you might see looks like rebelliousness is sometimes and often, only just from what I've seen over the years, really a very, very sweet, sensitive place inside of them that's relishing for a relationship. So I think I found learning with our children and learning with students things that they might not have been accustomed to learning about. Number one, when you mess up, how you're still beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I find with teenage girls, they will sometimes literally will sit there and will learn and they'll go, like on the process of tshuva, the ability to even become stronger through what you've gone through, because back to being imperfect, sometimes they feel like, well, I've messed up and I've had that conversation with that boy and I've watched what I shouldn't have watched, so it's all or none, right? No, it's not all or none. Let's learn what the tzaddikim share about what it means to be human and how your greatest growth can come through your struggles.
Okay, so what started with Gashmias is ending with Ruchnias. And I just have to say, this is my 7th year living in the Five Towns. And so I've lived in a couple other communities. And I have to tell you how incredible it is to be on a panel with all of these incredible women who represent all different schools. And one of the most amazing things I have found personally in the Five Towns is the variety of schools that are available in the Five Towns. Someone could have a child going to one school, a different child going to another school. It's really Chinuch Panel Event. It's unbelievable, and take it from me who's lived other places, it doesn't exist everywhere. So a number of years ago, my kids were all little, I went to hear Rabbi Krohn speak. And he started off his speech with, I'm going to say 5 words tonight that are going to change your life forever. I don't know the 5 words because I fell asleep. I started by saying my children are little. I had a night out. I sat in the back. He was speaking. It was quiet. Nobody was bothering me. I fell asleep. I went up to him after it was over, wiping the drool from my chin, and in a very bashful way, wanted to ask him what the 5 words were. I still don't know till this day. But what I did hear was a woman asking him a question. She said, I have 2 sons. I raised them exactly alike. Send them to the same schools, the same bar mitzvahs, even like exactly how the parties, one should be jealous from the other, the same camps, everything the same. One of my sons is this incredible Kovea Itim, and he works and he balances and learning and his children and his family. It's amazing. And the other one, I don't know, he's like kind of like keeping stuff, but not really sure. How could this possibly have happened? I gave them exactly the same upbringing. He said, that's your problem. You gave them exactly the same upbringing, and they're not exactly the same people. You know, we look at each of our children and our students, our children. This is certainly, as Mrs. Kamenetsky said, a very, very passionate topic for all of us. And we're not sure, as someone said, how to navigate our children when they're not exactly what we want them to be. And we love them, hopefully, that they're perfectly imperfect. But there's a little part of us that just wants them to be, just follow exactly what I'm saying, and then this will all be good. I remember going to one of my daughter's 3rd grade parent-teacher conferences. It's always a joy when you're a principal and children's conferences. You're like, please let this be good, please. And this teacher said, I can't get her to daven. I don't get it. I have the best stickers in the world. You don't understand. I have the scratch and sniff, I have the puffy ones, all the Google, nothing. There's not a sticker that will motivate your child. And this is like a tried and true thing that I've been doing since my oldest child was born and he's 35. She won't comply. I said, I get it. I just wanted to tell her to leave her alone. She tried that entire year. It didn't happen. She didn't get a sticker. And she was very happy not having a sticker. It was fine. But sometimes when we force the issue, when we push it, stickers, prizes, Slurpees, whatever it is, sometimes it backfires. Most times it backfires. We need to let our children navigate and go through learning tefillah, learning what it means to be tznius, not just for girls, but for boys too. Learning what it means to give tzedakah, how to give tzedakah, learning what it means to have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? Where is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's a very, very difficult concept. And being in the elementary school, it starts obviously in preschool, and Rabbeim are sitting there and telling them stories about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes I think to myself, like, I don't know how they're getting it. But most of them are, because they see a Rebbe who loves it. And that Rebbe loves them. And they love the Rebbe. So then they love what the Rebbe is teaching. Love is the peace. Accepting your children and loving them through the process is the relationship that really solidifies what's happening to our children. We talked tonight about helicopter moms and parents, I won't just say moms, lawnmower, bulldozer, whatever we want to call them. And we talked about solving their problems. And maybe we should and maybe we shouldn't. Here's that moment. That moment where that child is not going to daven for that sticker. Doesn't matter what that sticker is. You give her the whole sheet. It's not happening. But that child needs love. That child needs a teacher, a parent who loves them. That child needs a parent and a teacher who will teach them what the tefillah means, and maybe it'll resonate with them. Maybe there'll be a story that will resonate with them, maybe not. But if we love our children and we are the role models for them in Yiddishkeit, then maybe some of that will rub off on them. I heard many years ago from a Rebbe, one of my sons, Rebbeim, that on Friday nights in the winter, he starts with dessert first, and then they take a break and they play a game. It's family game night. And then they go to the next course, and then they play a game. And he makes Friday night their game night. I thought, that's great, but I like to sleep Friday night. So I decided I'm going to do something a little different. And we took Shabbos Mevarchim. And in our home, Shabbos Mevarchim, it's just something we do. My kids go to the dollar store. They go to the party store. They come up with some crazy theme. We've had luau's and all sorts of stuff. And they decorate the Shabbos. They won't set it. And I'm not just talking about little kids, by the way. I have an 11th grader. She loves it. Okay? And they decorate the table. Even my married daughter would say, oh, Shabbos Mevarchim, what are we doing? You know, and they decorate it, and we start with dessert first. And so we take a little bit of that, and we tweaked it to fit our family. It's something that the kids look forward to. If we're always going into Yom Tov and Shabbos stressed, set the table on, oh my gosh, and this is not done, and that's not done, and why is your shirt stained, and what's happening? Then that's the feeling that comes over in our homes. That's the feeling that a child walks away with. If we're coming to the table with, it's fun, and it's light, and it's Shabbos, and it's time for us to disconnect, and we reconnect with each other, then that's something that a child will hold on to, because that's the time for those relationships, and that love, and those conversations, and those jokes, and those memories. That's Shabbos. Shabbos is that time. And maybe eventually it spills over into davening. Maybe eventually it spills over into tznius or other things. Maybe yes, maybe no. Each one develops at their own time. You know, I was thinking about, now that my oldest, Baruch Hashem, is married, and my youngest is now 11, so as my children like to say, we're a big kid family. I was thinking about how exhausted I was when my children were little. I was really exhausted all the time because their needs were all these physical needs, right? We had the physical need to have to take a bath, and you have to have the dinner ready, and you have to have the thing, and they need help with this, and they need help putting their shoes on it. Everything is help, and they need to drive them everywhere, pick them up. And I figured, okay, as they get older, it gets so much easier. But it doesn't, because it's no longer a physical need. Now it becomes an emotional, a spiritual need. And they need you all the time, even if they say they don't. They need you all the time. They need for you to talk it through with them. They need to discuss it with you. I'll leave you with one last story. One of my daughters came home very, very upset from school. And I said, what happened? She did not like her to get upset. I said, what happened? She said, had a really frustrating experience in class. The teacher asked why we do something. And no one knew. No one knew the makar. No one knew why we do something. Except for one girl. One girl whose whole entire family became Bali Tshuva, and they go to the zone, and they go here, and they go there, and it's so much fun. She knew the answer. And then, to add insult to injury, the teacher said how disappointed she was in us that we didn't know, and we had been in yeshiva our whole lives. And she said, Ima, no one ever said it was okay to ask. And if I did ask, on the rare occasion, it was kind of like, were you not paying attention? How come you don't know? Sometimes we overlook and we don't get into the nitty-gritty details of why we do something. Sometimes we can't. But if your child asks those questions, go to a Rav, ask a Shaila, come back to them, show them the process for getting the question answered. The other piece that was spoken about before was feeling alone. When a child feels alone is when they retreat out. If we teach them that we're part of a community, we also have questions. We go to a Rav, we go to somebody that we rely on, we speak to our Rebbe, we speak to a teacher, we speak to a Mora. Whoever we speak to, we ask those questions because we're always learning. We're always learning. And I always like to think back to the Avos Nimos. If you think, I look back and I get such chizuk from it. I look at each of the avos and imos, none of them were perfect. Nobody. And yet, Hashem had this incredible relationship with them. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, the entire time was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. Hashem never walked away. He said, no, you got this. We're talking about the creator of the world telling you, you got this. I mean, you should believe it. But you've got this. Let's take that lesson of Hashem having relationships with the avos and the imos, who are certainly on madrigas way higher than me, certainly. But have those relationships with our children. You got this. I'm with you. You're asking a question? Great question. Not, how are you asking that question? I've sent you to yeshiva your whole life. How do you not know that question? The answer is, oh, you have that question? Great. You know what? Let me call Rabbi so-and-so. I don't know. I'm not even sure the answer myself. You know what? Let's learn it together. Let's look at it. Let's look inside. Let's figure it out together. That's love. That's a relationship. It's not a judgment. It's not a, why are you asking that? It's that relationship that they're always looking for. And maybe through those relationships, Yetz Hashem, we should all have the Yiddish nachas that we want and hope for our children.
Wow, there was a lot. There was a lot of tips and things to use to connect. There's not much I could add to that. There's just one thing that, from my personal experience, I would like to add. Speaking completely as a mother, one of my children was going through a very difficult time, and I had to work on separating, like they said, that our children have a journey. I just had to separate my journey from their journey, and that I found to be very difficult. I have my own journey, and they have their own journey, and I'm not being judged by them and about them, and I needed to separate their journey. That was one exercise. And then I would daven. At the end of the day, it's all about davening. I would daven and I would be like, Hashem, I had a really good script. You didn't follow my script, but it was really, really good. And I had to let go of my script of how it was supposed to look. I'm still working on it. It's really hard, but that's so many times we have to let go of my script, of what I had envisioned in my head, what I scripted out of this child's life trajectory would look like, and that child's life. And, okay, so maybe he'll go into that field or she'll go into that field. I had to let it all go. And then my son was at a crucial point. It was difficult. And an opportunity came to me to do something as a schas. And I didn't want to. It was something difficult in a way of supporting Torah, but I didn't want to do it. And I had a long talk with somebody just, and he was trying to convince me that this might be a good idea for you to do. And he was trying to give me a Munah in a Yeshua. And I said, I have a Munah in Yeshua. But what if the Yeshua isn't what I want it to be? What if the Yeshua looks different than I scripted it to be? That's my problem. I know Hashem will bring me Yeshua, but the Yeshua might not look like what I want it to look like. And once again, I really had to work on letting go. And I was able to fulfill the mitzvah that was brought to me. And I did see Yeshua. And it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It was amazing in a different way. I found that so much of it was me letting go what I envisioned, what I expected each child's trajectory to look like. And it was such a huge thing. I have to have the big picture in mind. I'm not looking what he is now, what she is now. I'm trying to establish what they are going to be as an adult. Are they going to be a responsible adult? Are they going to have a connection to Hashem as an adult? I don't know what that connection is going to look like. I want there to be a connection to Hashem as an adult. It was a lot of me letting go, saying, Hashem, it's in your hands. I just need to daven. I have a friend whose son is applying to high school. He's in 8th grade. And she's like, asking me about the process. I'm like, all you have to do is daven. Nobody cares what the mother thinks anyway. You have to daven. I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, why does it tell him not in your hands right now? You just need to daven. We just have to let go. And I think there's so much in all of this. We have to let go and daven and let it up to Hashem. And it's a journey, and ride the ride, because we don't have a choice. So if we do it without stress and we're just riding the ride, it will be a lot more peaceful. And we should all just have nachas from our children, from each other. And and thank you so much. This has been such an amazing experience.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your wisdom and your hearts with us. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.